Do you have any further concerns? If there's anything nefarious going on here?
I don't think anybody's safe. I mean, I'm just not living under this boomer illusion that John F. Kennedy was killed by a lone gunman. There's no way that shooter should have made it up on that roof. That's my honest opinion. I got a bone to pick, one bone to pick with you about one thing.
Let's do it, brother.
Grew up in a Democrat hellhole. And once I figured out what the LGBTQ was doing.
Having Amber Rose speak at Republican National Convention, does that move us toward the principle? Or
1000%. I'll explain. Now she's on the track to reframing the entire way she thinks about the world, and probably herself, and probably the eternal. In World War II, when the German war machine put their sights on Russia and marched across the Ukrainians threw on the swastikas. There's nothing wrong with having a border, unless you're a little anti-God cuck. See, and these little anti-God, secular humanists, they all believe in this idea since the advent of the scientific method that they can bridge the gap between themselves and God.
My guest on the podcast today is former NBA listed player as well as MMA fighter and now politician Royce White. Royce is running to become a senator of Minnesota against Amy Klobuchar. Now, you may remember that I covered Royce on the channel recently where he took David Pakman to task about his love of sending little kids to drag queen shows.
I said radical feminists are out of control. Be clear. And they are. That's why they're bringing their children to drag stripper shows.
Let me ask about a couple of things.
Do you think that's okay? Do you think it's okay to sexualize children at drag stripper shows?
I don't think the children are being sexualized if they go to a drag show. No, I just don't think that that's the sexualization
You don't
of
think
children.
that you don't think children are being? Would it be okay for me as a grown adult male to take underage kids to a regular strip club?
I don't think they're allowed. No.
So why are they allowed to do it in but why aren't they allowed?
Royce.
Why aren't they allowed? Is it because of the alcohol or because of the sexualization?
I don't know the laws around strip clubs. I couldn't tell you. But Royce, if
you guys really enjoyed that video, so I thought I'd get Royce on the channel to discuss that plus much more. So without further ado, hope you guys enjoy this. Let's get into it. Royce White, thank you so much for joining me on the Reality Based Podcast. It's a pleasure to have you today.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it, brother.
No, my pleasure. What a crazy week. The Trump attempted assassination last week. You must be all over the place trying to cover it, trying to understand what's going on. Give me your reaction to that initially and what your thoughts are and what your thought process is around this whole incident.
Well, my initial thoughts were, this can't be real. Obviously, I received, as many people, I received text messages. And I wasn't watching it live. I was traveling. I was on the road. I was in California playing in the Big Three. We were in Anaheim this past weekend. And, just a madhouse running around kind of in the fray. And so I received a text message first. I wasn't watching live. So your first response is, okay, somebody's getting it wrong. Obviously, this didn't actually happen. Maybe it's some phony footage, something doctored up. Somebody got their wires crossed and we're not dealing with reality. And then as I tuned in, looked on X, every trusted account that I know, people that I know from within the movement, the conservative movement, conservative media, the MAGA movement, they had already posted the footage. And, my next thought was, here we go. This might be it. Dangerous were my next thoughts. Stay dangerous. This is dangerous. Right?
Yeah.
Obviously, shortly after that, the clip of him standing up, of him rising up and giving the fight, call to the people is just going to go down as one of the most pivotal moments in American history. There's no other way to describe it. At that point, I was filled with emotion. And I think rightfully so, as many other Americans and many other people all around the world were. You have to have been in near-death experiences to understand just how courageous it is to have been shot and be in let's call it the chaos of adrenaline and uncertainty and fear, and have the wherewithal to stand up and maybe your death declaration being for the people to fight indiscriminately. He wasn't specific. He didn't say who. He didn't say what. He just told the people to fight. And if you understand it at that level, it's why it's had the reaction it's had, and it's why he's going to win the election now.
Yeah, man. Like when I think about it, when he was on the floor there, you don't know with the adrenaline. It's like when you hurt yourself. Like when I've fallen off my motorbike in the past, you get up and it's the reaction is like how hurt am I? How bad is this? Is this going to be? And he wouldn't have known that. He wouldn't have known if he was seriously hurt, and he would have been absolutely in the eye of the storm. So have you had any near-death experiences like that? Random question.
Yeah, I've had a few myself. But I'll say this, dealing with anxiety disorder, panic attacks growing up as a teenager and even into my adult years, I say I've dealt with many near-death experiences. A lot of people wouldn't understand it unless they had panic attacks, especially severe panic attacks, but each one is like you're dying. In fact, panic attacks so closely simulate heart attacks that you have to usually do an EKG and blood work to discern between the two when you go to your local emergency department, because they have the same physical markers and phenomena. So I've been through many near-death experiences. And again, if Donald Trump hadn't won you over before for whatever reason, and there's a lot of things we could criticize him for policy-wise or some of the choices he's made morally, ethically, all of us would fall under that same category, probably, unless you're a saint, which I don't know many. But if he hadn't won you over before, there's nothing like somebody trying to take a shot at you when you're vulnerable and you have no chance to fight back, and you survive in that. Number one, there's a real touch of divinity there, real divine intervention, especially when you look back at the video of just how slightly his head was turned to have been missed by that bullet. If you're not rooting for the guy now, I know you're an ideologue. I know you're an ideologue. I know you're anti-American. I know you're a Satanist. I know you don't value freedom. I know you don't value valor and courage. And so now the line, God works in mysterious and great ways, and the line has never been drawn more clear in the sand for me personally, and I think a lot of other people all around the world.
And then obviously it's still, the fog is still amongst us with everything that's happening. But do you have any further concerns, any further trepidations about if there's anything nefarious going on here?
Oh, there's certainly something nefarious going on. In what way that plays into this specific incident, I can't be sure. When I call and talk to ex-military guys who were special forces, who did sniper, scout and recon and things like that, and they all say unanimously that there's no way that building, that rooftop should have been naked. That gives me great concern about the Secret Service, number one. In fact, after we get done here, I'm going to email you a soundbite of me being in St. Cloud, Minnesota on Wednesday evening before I traveled out to California. And a woman in the crowd at my town hall here, because I'm running for United States Senate, a woman in the crowd in my town hall asked me, did I think that Secret Service could keep him safe? And I told her very frankly, I don't think anybody's safe. I mean, I'm just not living under this boomer illusion that John F. Kennedy was killed by a lone gunman and that we've remedied or reconciled that assassination. So I don't live in that delusion. So from an honest standpoint, I told them in the crowd, I don't think he's safe. And I don't know if the deep state goes all the way down into Secret Service. If I'm the deep state, I would certainly be infiltrated in the Secret Service. There's no way that shooter should have made it up on that roof. That's my honest opinion. Many military experts who have tons of combat experience are saying the same thing. So there's something going on. And in terms of American citizenship and our freedom and our political future, there's always nefarious things going on, always.
How does that make you feel as somebody who's running for senator and somebody who is like very, very much an anti-establishment figure?
Yeah, well, it made me, again, to go back to that day and seeing that footage, my initial reaction was, I'd be lying if I didn't admit my initial reaction was anger. And anger because of the understanding that I could have easily been standing up there behind Donald Trump. Had I been invited to that particular, rally for some reason and had VIP tickets or whatever the case may be, I could have easily been standing back there behind Donald Trump while he was speaking. And so them taking a shot at him is kind of like them taking a shot at me. And that not only should all American citizens who support Donald Trump feel a sense of anger and frustration because of the man who was shot and killed, but I think all of us political leaders now have to reassess, this shame that's put on us for being conspiracy theorists, right? It's funny, that morning, I think it was either that morning or the night before, I had just posted, I guess you have to say now. I had just posted that they were trying to kill Steve Bannon for putting him in prison. And that was what they were trying to do. They're dog whistling to kill American patriots and conservatives across mainstream media right now. If you don't understand that, then you're probably living in la la land. But that is what they're doing. When they say you're fascist, you're Hitler, you're a dictator, you're a threat to democracy and freedom and women's fundamental existence, right? What they're trying to do is get beta male cucks to ratchet up their manic energy to try and defend women, and that's really what the whole gamut is about. And it's super perverse and odd to say the very least. But I said that they're trying to kill Steve Bannon, and there were local Republicans in Minnesota who said, we're 30 days away from a Senate primary, and our endorsed candidate is spreading conspiracy theories about somebody trying to kill Bannon. And then somebody takes a shot at Donald Trump. And, I don't mean to say I told you so, but we are living in those type of times politically and culturally and societally. So, it is what it is. Yeah, I feel the threat for sure.
Yeah. And how is Steve Bannon going? Because I know that he's endorsed you and you guys have a relationship.
Yeah.
Have you been speaking to him recently?
Well, I speak to him through his contacts. He has a couple of contacts. I'm waiting to get on his email list at the prison. From what I know, he's doing well. He's being well looked after inside the prison from all that we can do. And I love him. He's family. He's my mentor. He's a friend. He's a comrade. And he is one of the most brilliant men in modern American history and world history. And there's a reason why they say he's one of the most dangerous intellectual minds in politics all around the world. He's considered one of the thought leaders of the populist movement, the rise of the populist movement from here all the way to Europe and beyond. So, it's a great honor and to have met him, to know him, to be very close with him, to have his mentorship and his guidance. And he's just a wealth of knowledge. And what strikes me the most about Steve Bannon is that the American media, the American mainstream media, and the mainstream media all around the world has done such a good job at controlling the narrative. A lot of people who hear Steve Bannon's name will have never actually heard him speak. Similarly to Donald Trump in many ways, although you probably had a better chance of hearing him speak at least because he was, had a world syndicated reality TV show. But Steve is a different case entirely. There are people who have never actually heard Steve Bannon speak who only know of him through the headlines of the mainstream media. And unanimously or overwhelmingly, when people actually hear him speak about economic nationalism, they're swayed. They're converted. And so that's a daunting reality for how powerful mainstream media is, but a sign of optimism for this movement that the truth is on our side. And when people actually hear the truth, they have a change of heart and mind.
And why did you, because you were an NBA player, you were signed on an NBA list, and then you did MMA fighting, which is like an amazing sporting achievement in itself. Anybody who gets in the cage has my respect. And then you got into politics. So why was it that you decided to get into politics?
Yeah, well, and I saw your we got connected after you covered the Pakman debate that we had, if you want to call it a debate, and we should talk about that some at some point today if we get a chance. I got a bone to pick, one bone to pick with you about one thing.
Let's do it, brother. Guys, big announcement. Reality-based merch is here. What have we got? We have got Life's Tough. Get a helmet. You guys will remember the iconic Candace Owens moment.
What do you have to say to the trans students on this campus who feel actively victimized by your presence here?
Life's tough. Get a helmet, man. I'm too pregnant for this. Next question.
So if you guys would like to get your hands on the most based merch in the entire game, bar none, then head to realitybasedstore.com. All of those links are going to be linked in the description. Get back to the video.
But we'll maybe I'll get to that in this story, actually, and if you'll give me a moment to kind of explain my path here as a young adult. I'm only 33 years old, right? I've been of drinking age since 21. It's just yesterday. 10 years is just yesterday. It really is. And I remember it was like it was yesterday. But, the NBA was my first encounter with globalism. I didn't know it then. I didn't know what to call it. I just was in it. I experienced it. I had to fight it. I had to fight it alone. And one of the reasons I had to fight it alone is because of the power that influence and money and the law has at that level of corporate culture. And The NBA is a watering hole for a global corporate community. There's no doubt about that. Every industry and every interest you could possibly imagine is at the watering hole of the National Basketball Association. And I didn't get it. You know, I was just a kid who came in and had publicly discussed my own struggles with anxiety disorder and the importance of mental health as a political issue. And I fought the NBA on mental health policy. And when I went into the NBA, when I was drafted, there wasn't a single mention of mental health in the entire collective bargaining agreement. That was troubling for me because not only was I diagnosed with anxiety disorder, but I was also prescribed anti-anxiety medication. Now, one of the catches to this story early on is that there is a banned substance list in the NBA, which signaled to me that they had some frame of reference of the scientific validity of mental health, right? You don't come up with a banned substance list that has benzodiazepines on it unless you're informed by doctors who well understand mental health as a topic. So I'm sitting there going, okay, wait a minute. I'm prescribed this medication, benzodiazepines, Xanax, anti-anxiety medication, one of the most commonly prescribed in America and the world, in fact. I'm prescribed this medication, but there's no language about how mental health or this medication is interpreted from the company. And so, you know, for example, what's too much Xanax? How is it going to be seen if I have, let's say, abused Xanax or not been in compliance with the let's say the prescribed dosage? And one thing I got to say as an aside about benzodiazepines they are one of the most addictive drugs in the world, and they are one of the few drugs that can kill you from going off cold turkey, withdrawals. You could do heroin and go off. Yeah, you could do heroin and go off cold turkey. You could do meth and go off cold turkey. You could do coke and go off cold turkey, and you'll be sick. It ain't gonna feel good, but it probably isn't gonna kill you. You go off of benzodiazepines or alcohol cold turkey, and you will die.
I think this is similar to what happened to Jordan Peterson, why he was really sick, because
it's exactly what happened to him.
Taking benzos, and then he said that he was up all night for like every night for like a whole month, and then was sick for ages because he just felt like he was just paralyzed with fear and pain for so long.
Yeah, it's exactly what happened with Jordan Peterson, and it happened to him after me. And Jordan's an interesting part of my story too. I'll get to, because I spent 2 years living in Canada right around the time he had the controversy about Bill C-16. But so I'm sitting here, and again, the benzos are one of the most dangerous drugs that there are, and the reason is you can take them as prescribed, but they're so powerful that if you take them as prescribed, even at a low dose, you will have to increase your dose over a short period of time, and you will start to experience interdosal withdrawals. Interdosal withdrawals are, I take the dose as prescribed, and over time, I'm going to have to take it sooner and more of it in order to achieve the desired effect, which ultimately leads to you increasing the dosage to a point that could be dangerous and obviously addictive, right? I mean, physically dangerous at the dose, but physically addictive over the course of time. So I'm calling these things into question. I'm saying, wait a second here. We got to get some clarity on this. My agent's not really helping me. None of the NBA Players Association, the union, they're not helping me. They don't want to have that argument or fight. So I had to kind of stand on the soapbox by myself and said, I will not play unless we clarify this. Now, what the NBA tells me at the time is, so what if you don't play? You haven't got a rebound, you haven't scored a point, you haven't got an assist. To us, you're just potential. And as potential, we don't have to consider your humanity. We don't have to consider the truth. We get to determine what the truth is because we hold all the levers of power. And that power in their situation was the media and how the media depicted me. So what the media did is they shorthanded my story and saying, there's a guy who just couldn't fly. Not the case at all. I had a fight about mental health policy, and I ended up being right. 2 years later, the NBA would institute the mental health policy, the very policy that I wrote for them, that I wrote as a suggestion in my own fight with them. They blackballed me and they put the policy in, and now they make sure, still to this day, that anytime my story is brought up for your common person who may follow the NBA or politics casually, they make sure that it's all about me being afraid to fly. And they use it to say, this kid's afraid. This kid's just some wuss who's afraid to fly. Don't listen to him. He has no credibility. He's an idiot. Well, now Boeing is going to shit as well. So I guess I was right in that regard too. But you understand my point, right? This was my first experience with how politics work at that high corporate level. After that, I kind of went off the radar for the NBA because I couldn't even get a tryout. Now, understand, you may not be a very big basketball fan or an aficionado, let's say, but my skill set wasn't just, hey, this guy has the talent to play in the NBA. My skill set was, this is one of the most NBA-ready and versatile players that we've seen in a long time. I led my college team in every major statistical category. All 5 major stats: points, rebounds, blocks, assists, and steals, which means that I do a little bit of everything, which is one of the most coveted skill sets or one of the most coveted qualities in any professional sport, let alone basketball, right? I mean, if you're a corner and you can catch a little bit, okay. But if you're a basketball player, you have to sort of play all 5 positions at once. So the guys who are versatile are highly coveted. I couldn't even get a tryout. I wasn't even invited to training camp because of the stand I had took on mental health policy. Everybody unanimously from the top down considered me to be radioactive, okay? I was canceled before canceling was a thing. I was canceled, but I was canceled for mental health policy, which would later on indicate to me how the Democrats really think and what they promote versus what they really believe, okay? So anyway, I go off the radar and I go to Canada to play for 2 years. I was there in 2016, 17 into 18. And I was there when Jordan Peterson went through his situation with Bill C-16. And up until that point, my political silo was constrained to mental health and that topic because it was what I was dealing with, right? I didn't understand what had happened with leftism and activism and the Marxists. That hadn't really dawned on me. I hadn't been exposed to it. Even growing up now remember, all of this BLM stuff, this postmodern BLM stuff, it was happening in the universities, obviously, and it was happening subtly in American politics in its respective corner. But the mainstream push of Marxism and BLM leftist activism, political agenda, that's post Trayvon Martin. We can go back and see the roots of it before that.
Is this where we get into the bone to pick with the video? Is it about the BLM side of things?
Yes, a little bit. But
all right, cool.
But what I'll say is, again, the 2012 was really the inception of this leftist push of American politics, okay? Mainstream, let's say. BLM was the advent of the mainstream push of left politics. The progressive left, far left, extreme, you can be a woman and become a man. Okay, I didn't even really realize that. Coming up in high school, playing basketball, All-American, #1 player in my position in the country, not even really thinking about politics in that regard, well-read, very interested in history, very interested in politics, but didn't quite understand what was going on yet. So when I got to Canada and I was living there and I saw what was going on with Jordan Peterson, in my mind, I'm going, what are they even talking about? I don't understand what this argument is about. As a Black man who is now living in Canada as a professional basketball player, I don't understand why they are calling this guy a racist because he won't use people's pronouns. What is going on here? It was like being dropped in an entirely different world. You know, it's like I was dropped in an entirely different world and time period, and there's flying cars. I'm like, what's going on here? But as I started to listen to it, I started to understand it. I didn't quite fully understand it, but I was starting to understand how identity was being used, and it offended me. And I actually have one of the first 100 copies of 12 Rules of Life signed by Jordan Peterson because he and I got connected during that time. And so after I was in Canada, which, by the way, I was there for 2 seasons, we won 2 championships in a row. And one season I was the MVP, one season I was the scoring champion. I led the league in scoring, and I had the most recorded triple doubles in league history in 2 seasons, 7-season league history. Just because people say that I couldn't play, they still say I can't play, right? But that was a good time for me basketball wise. Anyway, I come back to live in the States. I joined the Big Three, which is Ice Cube's 3-on-3 league, and in 2019, I started talking about all these political issues that I was interested in, like Julian Assange and Edward Snowden and the Uyghur genocide and
it's not the one that the NBA wants. NBA doesn't want to hear about the Uyghur one, hey?
Yeah, they don't like the Uyghur one. Yeah, well, no Democrats like the Uyghur one, really. But yeah, I started talking about these issues in 2019 when I joined the Big Three, and then in 2020, George Floyd happened, and it was the most remarkable thing to me because I was living back here in the Twin Cities, and I was born and raised here, right? And I love the Twin Cities, and I love Minnesota. I mean, I'm one of those guys who's a hometown fanatic, like. You know, if you ask me what's the best place to live in the country, I still say Minnesota, all flaws included, just because I'm a loyalist. That's just kind of who I am. And it was remarkable to me to watch the way the narrative was being crafted in 2020 after George Floyd died. And it was remarkable. And I'll say this. I still wasn't really aware of Antifa like that. I didn't really know about Antifa. You know, it was just kind of bubbling up when I was on the road, let's say, right? You know, it's because I was drafted to Houston, lived in Philly. I got traded to Philly. I was living in Philly. Then I was living in Sacramento. Then I was living in Canada. And that was all from 2012 after Trayvon Martin died right up until about 2018, that little 6-year window. So I wasn't in the community at the grassroots level and really getting to hear everything that was being said and what was being done. This was the first chance I got to hear it up close and personal and see it. And when George Floyd died and Minneapolis caught fire, I was down there. I went down there because I wanted to see what was going on. A lot of people in Minnesota were there. And I remember the day it set fire. Now, remember, I'm from Minneapolis. Like, I grew up in those South Side Minneapolis streets. I know the block where he died. Like, I know it well. And so before it caught fire, everybody was kind of just circling. They were hovering like something's going on here. Something's happening. People want to know. We're interested. If you weren't if you weren't busy, you were there. I can't tell. It was like a state fair almost, a revolving door of people who were coming and going and checking in on this situation.
And this is just after the incident.
This was immediately after. I mean, talking hours that same day, right?
Sure. Because I remember how quickly it just blew up into something so massive.
It was unbelievable. And so I remember I was out there. I was literally sitting. I remember when the Target on the South Side, which I've been to many, many times in my life, the Target on South Side Lake Street right there, they started taking the carts from the parking lot and pushing them up to the police precinct and creating these barricades. And that's when the news really turned up. And I remember Eric Weinstein, who's good friends with Jordan Peterson in the intellectual dark web, right? I mean, I don't know if they're great friends, but they're in that same little crew, right? Brett, Eric, Jordan, et cetera. And I also know Eric as well. And I remember Eric Weinstein put a tweet out. He said, "It's on in Minneapolis." And he was right. It was on. Mm-hmm. And so I was down there, and when it caught fire, I remember there being this, me thinking that something dark had changed in the energy, right? Like, it was no longer Black people who lived in the South Side of Minneapolis who were upset about what took place. There were all of these, and I'm just going to say, white folks who were college age, it looked like, dressed in black, and I didn't understand. It looked strange. Let me just say that. It looked weird to me as a Minnesota native. And I decided the next day that I was going to organize peaceful protests in contrast. And I was like, hey, look, if people, American people, no matter what your politics are, want to peacefully demonstrate, we give that right up. And we forego the opportunity to do that, the necessity to do that at our own peril. So my protests were not about supporting BLM. I never was involved with BLM. In fact, the local BLM activists hate my guts, and they went after me when I organized my own protest independent of them. And that's the only gripe I had about what you said, is because it needs to be understood. It can't be overstated that everybody who put on a Black Lives Matter t-shirt is not a part of that organization, nor do they understand the politics of that organization. It can be overstated. And I learned that from being there, because my protests were about economic sovereignty and the link between an institution like the Federal Reserve, how mainstream media is run, controlled, how the narrative is used to distract you and pinpoint your focus on the police precinct and policing, when people, American citizenship, economic nationalism, which I would later later add in to my political platform. Didn't really know what to call it then, but economic nationalism is more of an American issue that spans all walks of life. And so the mainstream media, this is how duplicitous they are. The Pakmans and all the other like him on the left couldn't wait to prop me up when they thought I was the next up-and-coming Black Lives Matter activist. They love putting my face on the Washington Post. In fact, there's an article you can go look at, the Washington Post, where they say, rising activist Royce White towers over Minneapolis in this time of need. I mean, it was queued up for them to turn me into this celebrity activist.
Makes sense,
until they realized I was leading protests to the Federal Reserve. As soon as they realized that none of my protests ever made a stop at the police precinct downtown, but always made a stop at the Federal Reserve, and I did over 10 of them, and there wasn't one arrest, there wasn't one fire, there wasn't one fight. They were all peacefully led by Black men who had nothing to do with Black Lives Matter, who believe in the Second Amendment, and we carried our guns, open carry, out in the streets of Minneapolis, which is considered to be a cardinal sin in a liberal place like Minneapolis. But all the liberal white women in college who want to protest but still a little scared that the Boogaloo boys will show up, they like that the Black men had AR-15s for this occasion, right? Which signs something else. I hope we'll talk about the women and men question I didn't get to answer with Pakman. But anyway, so as I was out there leading these protests, people were very interested in the Fed. They were very interested in my message about the economics, the way the money works. The left mainstream media wanted nothing to do with it. They wanted no part of it. And slowly but surely, I started to hear Black trans lives matter. And as soon as I heard it, I was triggered back to what I saw with Jordan Peterson. And I went completely nuts on the local LGBTQ activist community. Not that I don't think they should have rights, not that I care what they're doing in their bedroom. I have my moral and ethical position as a Catholic, okay? As a Christian, I believe what I believe about the lifestyle. As an American and as a citizen and as government, I have a different line that's drawn. If you're in your house, you do what you want to do in your house, okay? It's got nothing to do with me. As soon as you use the death of a Black man to start to bring out the LGBTQ agenda, I got to draw a hard line in the sand. I don't know what I didn't even know what trans meant at the time. I had no clue what trans meant. They were saying Black trans lives matter. And I was like, what? I had to ask my boy, I'm like, what does that mean? What are they saying? When they told me, I went nuts. I was so angry that they were doing it, and it all became clear. Like all at once, I had this epiphany from being out there. Oh, the Democrats are using identity politics, Black people, women, the LGBTQ, and Jews to control and dominate the narrative of American politics. And all the while, none of those groups benefit from that activism. When you look at the net, at the net gain of what has happened in this country, none of those individual identity groups actually benefit. I mean, the LGBTQ is as distraught as ever, mentally, physically, emotionally, psychologically, politically. I mean, they're just in no man's land where we don't know if we're fighting to be able to be married or to be able to turn our sons into daughters and our daughters into sons, right? Or if we just want to support liberal white women who are in their mid-30s or 40s taking their infants to drag strip shows. We don't know what our movement's really about. That's disorder. That's, patently disorder.
Yeah, well, that's what David Pakman's all about, is taking his taking children to strip shows, and that was one of the more interesting parts of the conversation that you had with him. Yes. And it's definitely one of the more just eye-opening and jarring parts of it, because this is a guy who is so deep in his ideology that he actually is at the point where you're a fully grown man with a dick and two balls, and you're meant to be a leader and a protector and a provider in society, and you're advocating for the sexualization of little kids who are being brought to drag shows. And that's when you know that you're in real deep, right?
Well, 100%, 1,000,000%. And you can't even put a number on it. It's so clearly right and wrong. But what's scary about it is he's somehow amassed this following, this very substantial following of people who also don't view that as wrong and who will defend it and who will lie and who will obfuscate and who will try and divert the attention away from that very clear line of morals and ethics to whatever else they can latch onto. And it's just that's what blew my mind about the Pakman interview is watching the response. I mean, of course, I know what people like him are up to. I grew up in a Democrat hellhole. And once I figured out what the LGBTQ was doing, it was easy to go back retroactively in my own life and understand where that type of person was in my upbringing. Not hard to do. I know who David Pakman is. It's crazy how many regular, everyday American citizens are of the same thought. I mean, the PSYOP is unbelievable to me. It's almost, and look, when I said to him in the interview, and we talked about the interview, anyway, to cap off the George Floyd thing, the left went crazy. It became a fight and a referendum that I think is breaking out now all across the country on the left between Black people who know our history. We know what happened in this country. There was slavery, there was segregation, there was racism, a lot of it by Democrats, right? Jim Crow, KKK, the list goes on. And so we know that history. We've been lied to by the Department of Education and other institutions about how that history really unfolded and why and to what interest. But now we're starting to ask fundamental questions that don't really have to do with the history. It has to do with the right now. Like, does our prosperity as American citizens really have anything to do with allowing a man to be housed with women in prison? No, the two don't have anything to do with each other. So Black people in America are rejecting that. And that fight broke out right there in Minneapolis after George Floyd died with me and the local LGBTQ community. And I'm proud to have been on the right side of that one. As far as Pakman goes,
just quickly, I want to just cap that one off. So in the video, I think I mentioned your view on identity politics and how you were saying to David Pakman that you don't play identity politics.
Yes.
But then also saying, I don't like it when white liberals like you say X. And I completely get that point of view because white liberals is a certain sort of phenotype for a start, but it's also a certain type of demographic of liberals who feel as though they have this sort of savior complex and they are so caring about Black people. But then as soon as the Black people say something that they disagree with or are a conservative or something of that ilk, then all of a sudden they don't care about them so much. So I understand the white liberal part of things, but I'm somebody who doesn't really think that we should necessarily totally avoid identity politics because I think that identity is important in politics. So in terms of your own messaging, I mean, as a Black man, how important is that to you in terms of your political messaging?
Well, and I wanted to clear this up, and I was thinking about the interview today, and I was thinking a lot about this because this might be the most important political terrain that we have to sort out. This right here, because identity politics has become so profound in the political culture. What I said was I don't like the weaponization of identity politics. And that was the way that we started. And first of all, what's funny is he started out asking me a question about women, which is already playing identity politics to begin with, but isn't commonly seen as playing identity politics because women and the women's rights issue as an identity issue is just a kind of given. Like, we should all be discussing women's issues because, hey, it's the most important thing in the world. You know, narcissism, clinical narcissism, that has been psyoped and widespread from women. And I shouldn't be able to say that because I'm running for office and supposedly I need so many of them to vote for me. But I don't want them to vote for me by lying to them. Hopefully they'll understand that. If not, they get the government they deserve and they get the beta male cucks they deserve the way they have now. And that's not to their benefit. But my point is, I said I don't like the weaponization of identity politics. You can't separate identity out from politics. It's not possible. And you actually do it at your own risk. Because if you lose your identity completely, you open up the door for your tyrants, your overlords, the people who govern you, to prescribe you an identity. And that's even more dangerous than identity politics. And that is what I really, that's what I really believe. If you have no identity, it's even more dangerous than the weaponization of identity. So that's the distinction I would make. But my point in saying white liberal is, Black people are expected to think a certain way in this country, okay? And when we don't think that way, all of the expectations, cultural expectations that a David Pakman would place on fellow white people fall away in an instant. It's so dishonest and so disingenuous, it's hard to even put into words. You can't even quantify how dishonest it is. And so I'll give you an example. And I just posted this earlier because I saw Joe Biden was speaking at the NAACP convention. And now they're using Donald Trump getting shot as a way to advocate that Black people fall further into the camp of taking away constitutional gun rights. Obviously, they'll use any shooting as a way to take gun rights away. And I said it on X today. I said, man, telling Black people they should give up their constitutional gun rights while you pacify a culture that promotes the illegal ownership, let's say, and violent use of guns by calling it the culture is some nasty work. I mean, that is nasty, especially coming from a guy who authored the 1994 crime bill. I mean, what they're really saying is Black people should give up their constitutional and legal gun rights and just revert to be victimized by people who are illegally owning guns or fall into the judicial system from illegally owning guns or using them violently. I mean, that is the type of duplicitous use of culture and media, which is why I got into politics in the first place. That is why I got into politics. And so when David Pakman, and I'll explain why what David Pakman is doing is that. Don't be talking about no strip clubs. Don't be talking. Look, and this is a trick that they do all the time on the left. Don't talk to me about what's Christian and what's not. You don't believe in God. You don't believe in Christ. You don't have faith in God or faith in Christ. You mock God and Christ, and you mock people who have faith in Christ. So you don't get to say, you don't get to uphold the moral expectation of Christianity or the Christian life when you're an atheist or a Satanist. So don't be saying, well, that's not very Christian of you. Sorry, I'm not listening to you. You're not in the church. You're not in the sacrament. I don't have to listen to your moral grandstanding on what you think is Christianity when you're so obviously doing it just to try and do a little gotcha, you know? It's the same thing with strip clubs, for example, or American political proper, etiquette. You guys are a part of the most sexually perverse movement and agenda in the history of humanity. Really, it is. I mean, and you have to measure it by a growing and evolving standard of what we consider civility, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, I know they were messing with little kids and stuff, and there was pedophilia, 400 years ago. I get it, right? But as we've evolved and had a new standard of civility, we have to measure the transgression against where we've grown to, or else we're just stuck in time, frozen in time, really. And so the perversity of today is worse, in my opinion, than any time in human history, because we all know it's so wrong and we all can see it now. The pedophilia of yesteryear and yestercentury wasn't on display on everybody's smartphone.
Yep.
So you don't get to talk to me about strip clubs, Pakman, because we know if they were trans strip clubs, or if I was, let's say, at the Pride Parade, sucking a guy off in public, they would applaud me. Mm-hmm. They would say that I was a free, free-thinking, open-minded, tolerant individual.
And moreover, if there did happen to be campaign funds that were spent on maybe like buying a few blow-up pools for them to for a guy to be sitting in and people peeing on him and stuff, if you bought a few blow-up pools and handed them to the people on the streets of San Francisco, then that would be progress,
Well, yeah, and here's the other thing I'll say, and this is why I brought up the white liberal thing, okay? White liberals' latent racism is probably not triggered any more than a Black person who's not willing to toe the party line. There isn't a bigger trigger to white liberals' latent racism than Black men who think for themselves. I mean, you can just see how manic their energy gets when a Black man says, I think I like borders. What? You like what? They can't help it. And they get that little zany little voice going in their head, Pakman, he's a little cuck anyway. But my point is, here's what they're really saying. And this really offends me. when they say that you can't have a campaign event or quote court donors at a nightclub or at a strip club, what they're really saying is there's a certain type of people they don't want involved in American politics. And they're the type of people that often go to those places. And without going back deep into identity politics, we all know that there's a certain group of people, certain demographic of people who, let's say, dominate the culture of both nightclubs and strip clubs. It's why when you go to, let's say, a nightclub, for example, that there's this culture of what they call buying bottles, right? I mean, this is sort of a hip hop, rap, black, even let's say criminal drug dealer type of common culture. I don't know if people in the audience would know about that, but it's a cultural thing, right? I mean, if any black person out there is watching and they won't admit that it's cultural, then they're lying. And I don't do that. I just talk about things the way that they are. And my point is that professional athletes of both the combat sports and fight world and of basketball, football too. Is that going off on your screen too? I think when I give little thumbs up and cue cards and things, my Skype or Zoom or whatever goes off. But anyway, I must be making a great point. I got fireworks, but
exactly. Celebration.
Professional sports is dominated by black athletes traditionally in recent American history. There's no really arguing that. It's not a bad thing. It's not a good thing. It's just a thing. If you look at the top athletes in basketball or the top athletes in combat sports, they've been black. Muhammad Ali, Mike Tyson, Floyd Mayweather, the list goes on. Now, Roy Jones Jr., the list goes on and on. Basketball, Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, LeBron James, Kevin Durant. I mean, you see what I'm saying? I mean,
of course.
MMA,
I think
John
if you
Jones,
look at the top like sprinters of the 100-meter sprint throughout history, I think you have to go to like number 400 to find some French white guy.
Okay. So my point is black people dominate professional sports and athletics, right?
Yeah.
Part of that culture has become that they spend time and money at clubs, nightclubs. It's a common culture of American professional sports. And I don't really have an opinion about that. I wish that we would spend more time and energy and money investing in real estate and other things that would be a net positive economically for us as a community, as black people. It'd be more productive and long-standing. But I'm not here shaming guys because they want to take their friends to a nightclub. And it's ridiculous for the LGBTQ perverse community to try and make that claim or to try and cast that shame. And again, I'll say same with the strip clubs. And so what they're really saying is, we don't want any of these, and when I say them, I'm saying the Democrats, the liberals, the liberal mainstream media industrial complex. What they're really saying is, we don't want any of you young, rich, famous, influential Negroes involved in American politics. We don't want you meeting where you hang out to talk about Republicanism. We don't want any of your sellout Uncle Tom Republican candidates to venture on into a strip club or nightclub to talk to you about politics or to even be around you. We don't even really want them around you, but we definitely don't want any bubbling up of Republican or MAGA politics at your local strip club, because that would signal that an Amber Rose is on the way. And she is. And she is whether they like it or not. And it's not just her. There's a bunch of men and women out there who have felonies, who have been involved in crime, who have been involved in sin. And we as and here's what they're doing. Here's why they're doing it. This is what makes it even more sneaky. They're not doing it to disenfranchise me to black voters. No black voter who hears that I might have been at a strip, and first of all, as the story goes, we used the wrong card. We tried to change the card from the campaign card to a personal card. They wouldn't allow us to do it because the transaction had already taken place. So it was one of those, it was a misusing of a credit card, and it happens. It happens. But my point that I made to Pakman was, there is food at strip clubs, and don't try and act like you don't know that. And don't try and act like the food at the strip club is seen as somehow more unethical than the food up on a restaurant, a steakhouse on K Street. I guarantee you way more unethical things happen at your local steakhouse up on K Street there in DC than at your local strip club. Irrefutably. Okay. And
Right.
we should get into that. I want to get into that. But my point is, again, don't be saying that young black men can't meet wherever we meet. And the reason they're doing it is not even for the black folks who may vote for me. They're doing it for the conservatives. That whole campaign to bring up the strip club is to say, you Christians picked a leader who's not Christian. You conservatives picked a leader who's not conservative enough. They are bullying the conservative movement into keeping the tent small, closed, so that we can't win elective politics. And I patently disagree with this. Now, as first principles goes, philosophically, just like my stance on abortion, you hold the principle. There's a principle, you hold that principle. As long as you're moving toward the principle or you're moving people toward the principle, you're moving in the right direction. Same
Just
as
on that one, quickly.
Yeah.
Does having Amber Rose speak at the RNC convention or the Republican National Convention, does that move us toward the principle or away from the principle?
It moves us toward the principle.
How so?
100%, 1,000%. And I'll explain.
Please.
The reason why we lost this country to Satanism isn't because the Satanism proliferated and overpowered us. It's because people stopped preaching the gospel. It's because people stopped ministering the gospel and they stopped, let's say, promoting the values and ideas of American citizenship and patriotism. It wasn't them that overpowered us. It was us that conceded and went into our corner away from the people. And it gave them the people to pick from. And they're just sitting ducks out there, outside of the church, outside of the idea and scope of American citizenship and patriotism. They're sitting ducks. I know because I lived in a Democrat, socialist, communist hellhole of a black community that never had the representation of Republican politics, never. And so the same way we must go out into the let's say the unknown, all right? We must go out into the wild with the gospel. It's the same way we need to go out into the wild with American patriotism and citizenship and the Republican platform. And so my point in bringing that up is you do have to go where the people are, as sinful as they were. And that's what Christ did. That's why Christ spent a lot of times with thieves and prostitutes and sinners. He didn't keep the gospel for the people in the temple and say, hey, I'm just going to convert you. And actually, they ended up being the ones who killed him. They were the least likely to be converted into a more righteous way of thought. The thieves and the prostitutes and the sinners were more open to conversion. They actually were the ones who threw down their wicked ways and said, you know what, we're going to follow this guy. We believe in the miracles. They became the church. Paul, David was a man after the Lord's own heart. So my point is, if you look at modern American politics, the one pitfall of the mainstream conservative movement is that we've roped ourselves off to all of these potential voters and potential, Christians, people who could become Christian, because we don't want to go there. I want Amber Rose, and as long as it takes her, obviously from what she said, the first stone to turn over was her father telling her, hey, you might not have this Donald Trump thing right. And her being caught up in the propaganda and mainstream headlines of who Donald Trump was. And now she did what I think is a great sign of an inquisitive mind and a mind that's in a mind and a spirit that's in the right direction. She said, let me go find out for myself. The first thing I got to do is break away from the narrative. I got to go look into this for myself. I got to go do my own research. And upon doing that, she realized that she was being lied to. And now she's on the track to reframing the entire way she thinks about the world and probably herself and probably the eternal. And so if we want to shut people down like that, upon entry, we're doing the world a disservice as the church and as conservatives and as American citizens. We're not going to win elections, number one, but we're certainly not going to take this country or the world back from Satanists. We need people to convert. And we need people who we otherwise don't agree with. Look, I want the communists and the Satanists and the atheists to come into the grace of Christianity and Christ. I want them to convert. I just need them to keep their atheism and their communism where it is. They can't bring, and that's what I mean by holding the principle. And that's what I mean by moving towards the principle. The church is supposed to have been the principle. We gave away on the principle in order to bring people into the church. That wasn't necessary. We could have, you can let a gay person into the church without condoning homosexuality. You can let a stripper into the church, and Amber Rose was a stripper. You can let a stripper into the church without condoning transactional sex. You understand? Yeah. You can let a drug dealer and a drug addict into the church without condoning drug use.
I do get that 100%. And hey, listen, I'm a sinner just as well as we pretty much all are. I've done a lot of bad things in my life: sex, drugs, rock and roll, you name it. Yeah. So, I can't really necessarily judge. However, when I do think about these monumental events such as the convention and the likes, I worry about the subversion of the message of like you were saying before, of like being moved so far away from the goalposts, right? So when Amber Rose comes and makes this speech, it's good if she votes Republican, sure, but have we seen much of a behavioral change that would suggest that this isn't just more subversion? Because she's still got an active OnlyFans account. Just 4 months ago, she was saying that she thinks that Satanism is fine because it leads to more abortions. Yeah. And I'm not necessarily sure that that actually does help the cause. Like, I think the steel man of the position is that there'll be more votes and more likely to turn Republican. People will listen to her and end up coming over here. But if you dilute the message, you could push away the Christians and people who actually want to hear more of a message of Christianity rather than having somebody who's a current OnlyFans model coming into the fold. So I'm actually not sure that it does necessarily bring in more votes. You might push people out who you really wanted and then bring people in who are less reliable.
I know that's look, I know that's the concern, and I get it. Okay, fair play. It could be. Okay, but let's be clear here, okay? This is a Protestant nation. This is a Protestant and Catholic nation. It has been. The decline of Protestantism, Catholicism, and Christianity writ large cannot be thrown on those who are outside the church. That is a castigation of the responsibility of Christianity and of ministering the gospel and to spread the good word. We cannot cast that on to those outside of the church. That is on us. And so somewhere in here, we had a huge lapse in judgment, in desire, in ambition, in commitment to minister the gospel. And my only point now is you may be right. Could there have been more Christian, representation in the convention of those who spoke? I don't know. I haven't even watched every speech that's happened there at the convention. Obviously, Amber Rose is going to get a huge amount of attention because of who she is and when it was and the week that we've had. And Donald Trump, even, you can make the same claim about. That's my point. That's the better point, is that Donald Trump, you can make it the same claim. There are people who make that point. Donald Trump's not conservative enough. He's not Christian enough. The man was just touched by God. And so it really starts to call into the lack of faith that we have when we believe that certain individuals will decay our faith. Our faith is supposed to be solid as a rock, no matter what I come into contact with. I could come into contact with Muslims. I could come into contact with Jews. I can come into contact with communists, with atheists, with Marxists. I can come into contact with prostitutes, with crack dealers. It doesn't matter who I come into contact with. My faith is solid as a rock. Okay. We have not exhibited that in this country and in the West. We have resigned from society out of the fear that anything tainted will corrupt our faith. So I disagree with the premise. No, Christians shouldn't be disturbed in their faith at all by seeing Amber Rose at all. The lie we've told ourselves is that of the 50% of the internet that is pornography, that a good number of Christians aren't already watching Amber Rose. That's the lie. That's the BS we've convinced ourselves of. The thin veil of Christianity has become a sort of 501c3 affectation to sort of, let's say, define Christianity by sexual morality and not using profanity. Mm-hmm. And those are all important. Those are important things. Sexual morality and the use of profanity are, clearly defined in the Bible. but we let Satanists and pedophiles take our country. I mean, I think it pales in comparison. I honestly do. I mean, and this is a deeply theological, consideration, and only God knows the answer. But my point is that I would lean on the side of, even if Amber Rose doesn't delete her OnlyFans account for another 3 months, if she's moving in the right direction, it's the right direction, and she has to start somewhere. All of us do. We make a grave spiritual error of spiritual pride when we judge others, number one, but when we think, hey, I'm all sorted now. Yeah, I went to communion,
Yeah.
I went to confession, I'm a Catholic, I went to confession, I took the sacrament, I'm all good now. No. I'm still going to be on a lifelong journey to sort myself out and deal with the proclivity of sin and the degree of sin, the severity of sin. And there is degree and severity to sin. At least for us Catholics, we believe in the degree and severity of sin. And now Amber Rose would be considered a grave sinner. But there is a difference between venial sin and mortal sin. And Amber Rose's particular form of sin, public facing at least, of being a stripper or an OnlyFans model, is still in the realm of venial sin. Now, when she goes on to affirm or pacify abortion, she's crossing over into mortal sin.
Yeah.
My point is, I can't speak to when Amber Rose is going to have that full-blown conversion. I don't know the conversion that she's having. I can't say the journey of that conversion. What I would do is I don't preclude miracles as a Christian, because if I preclude the miracle of her having that conversion and being saved, I'm showing a lack of faith myself. That's my opinion. That's how I view Christianity. I want all the sinners. I want all of non-believers. I want all of the people who don't know the love of God in Christ and the grace of his sacrifice and salvation. I want all of them to be saved. I want all their souls to be saved. Does that mean
It's
I
an
have
interesting,
to let
yeah.
Go ahead.
It's
Go
an
ahead.
interesting
Go ahead.
perspective, because the steel man that I've come up with over the last day or so for the pro Amber Rose speaking at the RNC is that we're actually not it's not necessarily just about religion. It's not necessarily just about Christianity. It's not necessarily just about that. It's about being a Republican, and being a Republican's different to being a conservative. Being a conservative is different to being a Christian. Whereas I think that it's kind of all linked, because I think that conservatism is downstream of Christianity, and then Republicanism is downstream of conservatism, if you will.
Yes.
So I would understand your perspective more than I would understand the people who would say it's just for votes. It's just for votes. Need to do it for votes. Need to do it for votes. Because bringing in sinners and actually, like you said, Christ sat with the sinners, and that's a big part of the Christian teaching, is to actually go down to the level of even the lowest people and be able to speak to them. So I understand this completely. But yeah, I guess the big difference that I would have is with people who are saying it's just for the votes, just political expedience. But actually from the spiritual level, I didn't expect to say this, but from the spiritual level, it actually makes more sense.
Well, let's say this. What your leaders are supposed to do, your leaders are supposed to inspire a greater insight or way to think about things. Am I expecting every Republican voting American citizen, common working class man to have that insight into the Amber Rose versus not question? Of course not. That's unreasonable to ask of people. And the people who say it's all about politics, I will always stand in rejection of anything being all about political expediency. That is a that is a pendulum that will always end in corruption. No doubt about it. And so I'm not in that camp. Oh, it's all about the votes. No, it's not. But there is a Christian explanation that also accommodates the political agenda. It's for your leaders to articulate and sort that out and be able to explain it to people so they can graft onto it and use it as inspiration to go forward. And so that, that's one of the reasons, without patting myself on the back, that Steve Bannon came and sought me out and put me in the position and often refers to me as one of the intellectual thought leaders of the populist movement and of the MAGA movement. It's because I think about things at that level. And so, I just got lucky on this one theologically, I would say. But the greater issue, and I'll say this, and this is going to be even more controversial. I agree with you. Christianity is upstream from conservatism. Conservatism is upstream from republicanism. With one caveat, I actually am starting to believe that conservatism is a hybrid of republicanism. That the Republican, you got to remember now, the Republican Party and the republicanism actually stems back in American politics as being more prominent before conservatism. The conservative movement is a post-World War II, circa Barry Goldwater political ideology, okay?
Yep.
Not to say that conservative life or conservative thought only stems back to Barry Goldwater. I'm talking about the conservative movement that was concretized by the mainstream Republican political apparatus, donors, and the whole industry that came around it, okay?
Right, okay.
There's a reason why the conservatives have been bullied into their homes and allowed BLM to monopolize a fundamental American idea like the freedom of demonstration and speech. It's not by accident. And there's a profound intellectual by the name of Alexander Dugin, who, I'm not a Russian apologist, but when people say things that are true, no matter if I agree with them wholesale or not, I acknowledge the truth. That's good philosophy and first principles.
I think that Dugin is a very profound philosopher. I agree.
Very profound. Well, my point in qualifying it is, I can never be sure what somebody's agenda is with what they're saying. Yeah. You could be telling the truth and still have an ill motive. And in fact, it says that the Antichrist will know the scripture better than most, and he'll be able to wield that knowledge of the scripture to misinform and manipulate. So I'm not saying that if you tell the truth, you have a righteous motive, but I do have to acknowledge the truth on a first principle basis to even have a coherent thought. Okay. So Dugin is very profound. And what he said in The Rise of the Fourth Political Theory is that liberalism and conservatism are two forms of liberalism. That conservatism itself is a sort of controlled opposition ideology and movement, which in many ways it is. And if you need the example, the best example, unironically, that I could come up with has to do with the third rail of government, military. And you often see that no matter how conservatives and liberals argue around cultural wedge issues, there's always a certain number of issues, and this one particular issue that they agree on, and it's war. And there are implications of war with both righteousness, holiness, and the sanctity of life. But the conservatives and liberals, they always come together, don't they? When it's time to print up money to go to a forever war. And if you're a conservative and you can't come to grips with the fact that that implies something, that you can look at that result and go back and infer the motive, the problem isn't the Satanists. The problem isn't the atheists. The problem are the 501c3 Christians that have allowed their leaders and their politicians to wrap themselves in the cloth of Christ in the name of unholy and unrighteous wars. And we have done that. And we've started one with Russia. Actually, we've been in one with Russia since the British Empire, but we've continued one on with Russia, and we will continue to do it wherever we need to do it. And I only bring that up to tell you is as soon as we start talking about conservatism, red flags go off in my head, because all I see is Nikki Haley saying Donald Trump's not conservative enough, but she wants to print up a bunch of money and tax you and your great-grandchildren to go to war with Russia to protect everybody else's borders, right? Christianity was intended to be a globalist communion of faith, not predicated on war, not predicated on the racket of interest and usury and money. It was predicated on faith and submission. As soon as you obfuscate or conflate those two things, you're already into the heresy, right? I'm saying this to be honest, and I know it doesn't help me politically, and hopefully people will see the genuineness of me saying things that on face value are seen as not being politically expedient, running as a United States Senator. The conservative movement has failed America in allowing our faith to be used by the military-industrial complex. And that is a hallmark of the conservative movement. That's not a Republican idea. It's a mainstream Republican party, but it's not a Republicanism idea. Republicanism is something way, way different. Freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, freedom to have self-determination and self-governance. We're not given, what makes it fun, I'll give you another, the conservative movement, they defend what the mainstream conservative movement, whether they know it or not, The politicians say it, like David Frum and Karl Rove and Bob Keegan and Kissinger would have said it as well when he was alive, and many other, cultural icons in the conservative movement. What they're defending is the Democrat liberal order. That kind of affirms what Alexander Dugin said just there. I mean, you don't have to go further than that. Your mainstream intellectual conservative thought leaders openly admit that they are conserving the post-World War II Democrat liberal order. David Frum got right up on the stage with Steve Bannon at a Monk debate and said, conservatism is to conserve what is the best of liberalism. That's not republicanism. And people got to understand the difference. And so it's no wonder that the uniparty has metastasized the way it has. Yeah. Because people don't even understand the fundamentals of the ideologies that they subscribe to. So
it's interesting because I think that what you're alluding to here about the post-World War II liberal order, I actually think that that's crumbling before our eyes, even though it feels like it's being reinforced constantly. If you look around the world, there are a lot of different populist nationalist movements that are popping up. For example, you've got a few in Europe that are happening, even in Japan and places like India. They're going back to this more sort of traditional state of being, and their politics reflect that, and their culture sort of reflects that. Unfortunately, Australians are late to catch on, so we won't quite get there for a little while. But in America, I definitely see this happening. I think that there's an America First movement. Guys like Vivek Ramaswamy, for example, he's not a Christian, but generally they tend to be more Christian leaning. Yes. And I really think that that is the new era of politics. And that sort of neocon type post-World War II conservative politics of the forever wars that has been proliferated throughout the American right wing is dying. And I think that one of the things that we're seeing is on social media, these people are really getting ratioed once people are waking up and realizing the nature of the party and the nature of what these people have been doing and how they've been, like you said before, veiling themselves in the cloth of Christ and then going and starting all of these wars for profit. So how do you see that playing out over the next few years? And do you see this sort of, in a way, a renaissance of people actually going back towards a more of a nationalistic mindset with more of a Christian worldview?
Well, and now we'll go to another part of the Pakman interview where he goes, I'm not a white liberal. I'm a Hispanic Jew immigrant from Argentina, and there he was actually doing what I accused the left of doing in the beginning. I said the four identities are women, blacks, the LGBTQ, and Jews. He did it right there in real time. And the reason I'm saying that is because my claim was that when it comes to identity politics, all of these identities have been used as a way to undermine American citizenship. And what I mean by that is, again, you can't take identity out of politics, but the idea is that we are all one thing and another. You could be white, you could be black, you could be old, you could be young, you could be gay, you could be straight, you could be Christian, you could be Jew, but we're all American. And the evolution of a nation state and national identity and national honor and national pride can't be underestimated in the course of human history, because it is actually a coavailing mechanism. We are American. That can allow us all to, in some way, to some extent, play the same game because we have the same national interest, right? And so the way to subvert nationalism since the end of World War II and the institution of the post-World War II Democrat liberal order as the prevailing geopolitical philosophy, since World War II, the Jewish identity is used to undermine the nation state and the idea of national citizenship. Everybody who turns to their national identity is a threat to become the next Adolf Hitler. And I just reject that. And really what it's not about the Jews. That's what's so corrupt about it. And it's the same with all the other identity politic groups. It's not to the interest of the Jews. All they're doing is trying to promote globalism and global government. And when global government I'll give you a prime example. I say this, and I think people have trouble understanding it this last 3 weeks because I've been at these town halls on the campaign trail, and I bring it up, and people get this, this kind of glossy-eyed look when I'm talking about it. But isn't it ironic that you're supposed to, as a white citizen in America, renounce your American citizenship and your constitutional rights and your love of country and your pride in the flag? You're supposed to give those things up because your founding fathers owned slaves. And slavery is so morally reprehensible that anybody who has the same genetic identity today is guilty of those sins of yesteryear, yestercentury. Isn't it ironic that they use that to tell you, you don't be ashamed of being American? Because its history is littered with racism and bigotry. Yet you're supposed to send your hard-earned money to a country that participated in the genocide of the Jews? More recently, even. I mean, in World War II, when the German war machine put their sights on Russia and marched across the Ukrainians threw on the swastikas. And none of your mainstream media outlet people want to talk about that history, but it's right there, as clear as day. It's not hidden. It's not a conspiracy. When the Germans marched,
their ancestors still do it today, and that a lot of the things that people don't realize is that the Bandera Nazis in Ukraine, which do exist, by the way, are actually the ancestors of Nazis.
Thank you. I'm glad somebody else is actually living in the same world with me. Okay, I start to think I'm a little crazy. That's why my podcast is "Please Call Me Crazy." But you know, the Ukrainians threw on the swastikas and they genocided 1.5 million Jews just in Ukraine alone. And there was one particular massacre that took place in the Ukraine that always just hits me like a ton of bricks. Baba Yar. Baba Yar was one massacre in particular where they killed 33,000 Jews in 72 hours with small arms. Now, we're sort of desensitized to numbers because every couple of weeks our federal government wants to raise the debt ceiling and print up another trillion. Okay, so we're kind of desensitized to exponential math, but it takes a lot. It takes a special type of demonic, satanic, evil individual to kill 33,000 human beings in 72 hours with pistols. You got to like it. You got to like the work, which speaks to a culture. You understand what I'm saying? You know, it's not just organic or happenstance that particular massacre went down. Like, for example, if there was a massacre of 33,000 Black people in America by let's say neo-Nazis here in America, white people would never be able to live it down with the current culture of mainstream media. It would be seen as the most telling thing, the most telling symptom of a rot in culture of white people, right? But that same thing doesn't apply to the Ukrainians. Oh, that was then. That was back then. Don't think about that now. But take down your statues of Thomas Jefferson. Take down your statues of George Washington. Change the name of your football teams because of a history 300 years ago, but you're sending trillions of dollars to a country that still flies the same symbols, for Christ's sake. Okay? And the reason I brought you to that is I'm not anti-Semitic. What I'm saying is that all these identities are actually being played. They're getting played. Not only are they being used, they're getting played. Because there is a let's say a reciprocal relationship sometimes of you using me using you, right? I mean, that's possible. That's give and take.
For sure.
They're not just getting used, they're getting played. Now, some of them are understanding of being played, and I'm talking about the Jewish community, same as the Black community. When I see the NAACP, anytime I even hear NAACP, all I think of are bourgeois Negroes, sellouts, okay? They don't represent all Black people. The Jewish elite in this country around the world don't represent all Jews. The LGBTQ advocates or activists don't represent all lesbians and gays. And the female or the feminist movement, the feminist political ideology or lobby doesn't represent all women. That on a first principle basis is a lie, and then they use that to go on and further use people or use those groups as much as they can. And my point to you is that David Pakman understands this. He understands this well, that the Jewish identity is upholding the ambition of globalism and global government and undermining national identity. There is nothing wrong with being a citizen. There's nothing to be ashamed of that you're the citizen of a nation. There's nothing wrong with having a border, unless you're a little anti-God cuck. See? And these little anti-God secular humanists they all believe in this idea since the advent of the scientific method that they can bridge the gap between themselves and God. And this is the linchpin of the whole political divide. The scientific method was heralded as this great human achievement. It was one of the great heresies of the West. Post-World War II, post-Enlightenment, post-Enlightenment era, the rise of the scientific method was one of the great four heresies of the West. And the idea is that with scientific equations and math, we can bridge the gap between man and God. There's an implication in there about borders. When you don't have any boundaries or borders as a man, you're doomed spiritually. When you don't have any boundaries or borders as a country, you're doomed as a nation. If the borders are not just some arbitrary line drawn by politicians in countries. Borders are a limit on man's unfettered ambition to play God. And I really believe that. And every time in human history when somebody didn't believe in borders in either direction, going back to the neocon globalism military-industrial complex, any time in history where people didn't believe in borders in either direction, somebody started to believe in so many ways that they could play God, that they could rule the whole world, that they could be the king over everything. Christ is king.
Yeah, 100%, man. And that's the message at the moment. The key message, I think, is that Christ is king. Royce, man, I've really enjoyed this. Like you're a really insightful guy, man. I appreciate your insights, and I'm looking forward to seeing what you do in the future. Tell me a little bit before we go about how your campaign is going.
Well, I'm up against the machine, right? Doesn't get any bigger than Amy Klobuchar, who's, very tied into the military-industrial complex, very tied into our recent history in Ukraine, and as pro-war as it gets. And as such, the shekels of money, aren't, they're at her disposal, right? Every lobby that exists, every PAC that exists that's interested in this pro-war racket is at her disposal. They love Amy Klobuchar. So she's able to raise money. But she's a fixture of everything that's wrong with this country, in lockstep with Joe Biden, in almost zealot-like manner. And she is a very formidable political opponent. I think right now in this country, Republicans, conservatives, ultra-MAGA, American patriots like myself, we have to stop with the fear of losing. And when I got into this race, people was, you can't beat Amy Klobuchar. This is what the left does to you too. David Pakman and all these people go, he has no shot to beat Amy Klobuchar. They said I'd lose by 30 points. I'm only down 10 now. And after last week, every MAGA candidate is going up a few points because Donald Trump took a bullet like a gangster. Okay. And it just so happens that the decay of the Democrat Party as a whole writ large and Joe Biden's continued incompetence will bode well in the favor of most America First and MAGA candidates. Depending on where you live, out in Utah, they went after, they selected for another Mitt Romney character. I don't know what's going on out there in Utah. They should be ashamed of themselves, honestly. I don't know what's going on. Their Senate candidate is Mitt Romney reincarnated to the max. Maybe they got bad information, and that's part of politics. I understand that. But America First is on the rise. The nationalist populist movement is on the rise. And Amy Klobuchar is on the wrong side of it right now. And she's happened to be on the wrong side of a guy who checks all the boxes that make her own political platform very contradictory, right?
Yeah.
I mean, everything the Democrats do is for the black man. It's for black people. But the mainstream media will not even mention that I am the first black person to be endorsed by either major party
Right.
in the history of the state of Minnesota. The Democrats have never endorsed a black person to run for United States Senate. Why? Because 100 United States senators run this country and don't ever let anybody tell you anything different. They are the ones who pass the laws. They are the ones who sign and rubber stamp the budgets and the agenda. And that is why the Senate chamber is one of the most important political institutions in the history of human civilization, and especially right now. And so my whole campaign to people has been, tell them the truth, let them decide. You get the government you deserve. If you want to live under Amy Klobuchar and these other, corrupt status quo politicians, warmongering, baron robbers, then hey, you get to choose that. And that's the agreement of America and modern government that all of us Christians have have agreed to participate in. There's Christ and there's the eternal. As far as politics, the will of the people prevails. If the will of the people want Klobuchar, they can have her.
Yeah.
My campaign's going well. I'm telling the truth. I'm getting exposure, and I'm able to talk to a lot of people out there on the campaign trail. And we look like we're in the lead for the Minnesota primary race here coming up in August, on August 13th. And then we'll climb the hill of beating Democrat globalist Amy after that.
Let's go, bro. And also, do you do many CNN shows or MSNBC shows or going on many leftist podcasts? Because I would definitely cover them on my channel, and I reckon you would have those guys' numbers for sure. So any of those on the horizon?
Let me tell you the difference between conservatives, Republicans, and ultra MAGA, fire-breathing, America First patriots. They don't let us on those shows. David Pakman was probably going to be my last. They're not letting, and he's just pretentious and pompous enough to actually think he won a debate where he pacified and justified child pedophilia. So that tells you, I mean, he's not working from a full deck. Anybody who's a real hitter that really knows that's at least trying to keep up the thin veil of integrity, let's say journalistic integrity, they're not letting me anywhere near a main stage because they know that I know. Not only do I know the history. I don't talk about things from opinion. I talk about factual history, and they don't want to have those open debates. So I won't be seeing much MSNBC or CNN, but that's okay. They can only keep a lid on the truth for so long, and that's why channels like yours are important, brother. And I appreciate being on.
Hey, I appreciate you too, man. And next time, if I am ever around you, then I'm gonna come and do some training. If you're still training MMA.
Yeah, no, you know what? I was just telling I talked to Rose Namajunas yesterday on FaceTime. She just came off of a big win. She trains at my gym. Her and Pat Berry, they train under my coach, Greg Nelson, as well. And I was talking to Rose, and she just came off a big victory, and we're all happy for her as her teammates and gym mates. And she's an incredible talent. I mean, one of the most talented fighters that I've ever seen, just naturally talented and works hard too. Pat's a great guy, her trainer. But anyway, I was telling them yesterday, if I win the Senate, I'm still fighting, you know, because I'm 33. I'm in my prime athletically, and I really feel like I had my basketball career sort of taken from me, a necessary sacrifice, and I'm happy with it. But nothing says that I can't keep getting in that octagon and compete. And I actually, I lost my first fight by decision. I wasn't as good a wrestler or grappler then as most new MMA fighters without a wrestling background aren't. But I love training. I love to get on the mats at some point, but I plan to fight in the future. And I don't mind fighting as a sitting United States Senator. That'll be seen as ridiculous, you know, as a sign of my lack of commitment. But I think it's a sign of my integrity and a sign of my courage and the value of good, genuine competition.
That's it, man. You move well for a big guy, though. You had some good moments in that fight. I saw it, man. You got some good striking, but also speak well, think well. So, Royce, once again, thanks so much for joining me, man. I appreciate that.
Thank you, brother. Godspeed to you.